Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you're listening to the podcast or watching, if you're watching on YouTube, I've got another great guest this week. He is Adam Gray. I think, once again, I think a lot of people who are in the hobby right now are familiar with him. He's been all over the place lately. He has been going on and talking on lots of YouTube channels, and he has a big presence on Instagram, of course, with the content that he does regarding the hobby and regarding PWCC auctions, of course. So it's a real pleasure to get to talk to him today. Adam, first of all, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it.
Kurt, thank you so much for having me. And as somebody who's done a podcast or a show in the hobby for a long time, I know it's a lot of work. I know you've been doing a ton, and you've had a lot of great guests on. So I'm just grateful to be one of the many awesome people that you've had on the show.
Well, I really appreciate that. Yes, it's been great to get to talk to all the different hobby people. It's been a real passion project of mine, and glad that you're a part of it now. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun for me to talk to all sorts of people about the hobby.
Awesome.
And let's get started with your journey in the hobby, I suppose. So, how did you get started collecting, and what was it that kind of fueled that fire for you?
So I'm one of these. I think there's not very many of us, but one of these kind of weirdos that never stopped collecting from the early 90s. The first set I put together was 1990 hoops. I had a binder that I had organized by teams. And as I got duplicates, I would put all the duplicates in the same spot in the page. So like the first page was the Utah Jazz page, and I had like 6 John Stocktons back to back in the same spot, which I'm sure wasn't good for the condition, but it's still a fun early memory. And I've really collected since then. And so in the late 90s, I started working at a card shop. In the mid 90s, before that, I kind of realized that I could flip cards, and even though I had very little income, I had an ability to like sort of level up by buying and selling cards. And then I started working at a card shop, worked there for 6 years, served an LDS mission in between that time. And so really over the course of 8 years, that was my income, was working at a card shop. Paid my way through college, both my undergrad and my master's degree through that and through flipping cards. Later, flipped my way into my down payment on my house. Started the first basketball card podcast, which is called the Basketball Card Podcast. Started Basketball Card Fanatic magazine, which is a magazine that releases monthly. We have about 400 subscribers, so not some huge amount, but it's all about basketball cards and about content. Took a role at PWCC about a year ago. Was let go as part of the layoffs a couple of months ago, but still doing a lot of contract work for them and some contract work for other entities in the industry. And now, I mean, and I know I've given you a lot on this in this first like 60 seconds, but and now I'm just doing all sorts of different content. Still doing the magazine's still growing. And still building my collection every day. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, yeah. Well, I am sorry to hear about the news about the PWCC. If I'm not mistaken, your master's background is your CPA, correct?
That's right. Yeah, I
Yes.
did. I did about 12 years in the world of hedge funds and private equity.
So you're a numbers guy, pretty much, right?
Definitely a numbers guy, an investments guy,
Yeah.
investments and numbers guy for sure.
So did that fuel your passion for card collecting and doing it as sort of looking at it as more of an investment opportunity, or just in terms of just overall numbers? Were they just something that really kind of fuel that hobby love for you at some points these past few, especially within like these past few years?
Gosh, that's such a good question. So I think my interesting answer is actually it was the other way around.
Yeah.
So 12 years ago, no, my bad. So 8 years ago, I sat in an interview with a private equity firm in Salt Lake called Mercado Partners. And the interview wasn't going super well, which for me didn't feel great because I actually think in general, even though I'm somewhat of an introvert, I think I'm pretty decent at interviewing. I think maybe you don't know what you don't know. Maybe I'm bad at it.
Right.
But I think I'm pretty good at it. And I was sitting there with this gal who was asking me these questions, and I could tell I wasn't really hitting it out of the park. And then she said, "Well, tell me something different about you." And I was like, "Man, I don't know. I don't feel like I'm really hitting this really well right now." And so I said, "Well, I have this sports card hobby that I've done that's like paid for my education and my house, and has been like a huge part of my life. And it sort of piqued her interest, and she asked me more about it. So me telling her about cards, Kurt, and about my background, 100% is the reason that I got that job. 100%. And so I would actually say that everything that I've done in cards has been what has fueled the rest of my career, which is interesting now that I've sort of moved away from that world of finance and to cards, and have been full-time in cards over the last year. Like that's the passion. That's what's fueled it. I love basketball cards, man. I'm just the weirdest guy you probably ever met. Like it's been a huge part of my life, and like the lone serious sort of hobby of my life.
Awesome. And almost as if, yeah, you having a love and passion for cards at an early age kind of gave you that background to what you wound up doing in your life and what you're doing now, obviously. But being that sort of having that sort of background, which kind of led to you, I guess, having a good understanding of what it's like to do those more difficult financial things and hedge funds and things of that nature. Am I right?
Well, yeah. I mean, the thing that people don't want to talk about cards as investments, especially right now while the market's been so bad. But like, let's be real. Like, there's so many of the fundamentals in the world of sports cards in this market that apply to other worlds, right?
Yeah.
I mean, before I ever created a balance sheet and an income statement in Excel, I knew how to do that because of the business that I'd been running in the world of cards, right? Now there's awesome software out there that you can use that you don't need to use Excel the same way you used to. But like that's one thing. Understanding the basic laws of supply and demand, understanding rarity and its importance, understand just all of these things. Like I came to the table as an 18-year-old when I started college, understanding all those things far better than most people, because I'd been like this card wheeler and dealer for a number of years. And so, yeah, I mean, like I think it makes a huge impact on how much you understand in business. And I think look around you. There's a lot of people who've done cards for a long time who are like really smart business people, and I don't think that's an accident.
Nope, absolutely not. It really gives you basic fundamentals in terms of trade negotiations that can be really important later on in life, obviously, in terms of taking stock and inventory, data entry, and also understanding how to read data points, things of that nature. That I think especially nowadays with all the tools that we have at our disposal for people who are still young and still just now getting into it. Like back when we were getting into it, all we had was like Beckett Price Guide, and we were literally probably just doing an old DOS version of data entry and things like that for our own personal collections. Now there's so much at your disposal for the young collectors. I am actually kind of envious that they have so many things that can really help them learn all sorts of tools for what they'll probably wind up doing later on in life.
Yeah, I had a piece of paper that had prices on it. Right. Like I remember I had this Nolan Ryan card. I had like this period where I didn't just do basketball, but it was like a Nolan Ryan, 1973 Topps card, I think. And it was like, had this beat up corner, and I paid $6 for it, and it listed for $100 in Beckett. I might have the wrong year, but in its condition, I sort of talked myself into thinking that it was like a mid-grade card. I thought it was worth like $60. And so I had all these sort of like gains and losses that I was tabulating and what I actually thought I could sell it for. And again, I was like 12, I mean, that's amazing. I think having to do it on paper and not having all of the tools was probably the best thing for the development of my brain. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Or am I crazy? Maybe I'm crazy. I don't know.
No, it kind of makes sense. I mean, especially when you have to do it in that sort of a longhand and scale, or whatever you want to call it, as opposed to doing shortcuts. Yeah, I think it is definitely beneficial to your development, I'm sure.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay, so what started the passion for wanting to do hobby content, and how has that evolved? How has that evolved for you over the years, and how has that evolved you as a collector over the years?
That's a great question. So I think it was around 2015 or 2016. I was posting all day, every day on the Blowout forums, and really enjoyed that. Blowout has had, such a huge impact on the hobby, mostly for good. and has been and is still today an incredible resource. But that at that point was really the only way to get to know people. There wasn't like this Instagram sort of social media presence for cards. And at that same time, I was listening to the BS Report on ESPN a lot, the Bill Simmons podcast. And I was like, man, it would be so cool if we had a podcast that was just for sports cards. And so, I mentioned it sort of in my intro, like I Googled how to make a podcast. I'm CPA accounting guy by trade. I didn't have any idea how to do podcasts. I didn't have any idea how to talk in front of people. I had no idea how to do any of those things. And there was no card podcast out there. And so I literally went to Google and I found steps on how to build a podcast. I bought a microphone through eBay. And I just started like recording, and hardly anybody was listening to it. And at that time, Blowout was really sensitive, like so super sensitive about self-promotion. So I realized if I ever went to Blowout and I said, hey, I have a podcast, you should come listen to it, I'd immediately get banned. I don't think that's the way that it is today. But back in those days, 100%, you could not talk about what you were doing. You could not try to like get people to jump into another platform. That was the sort of the way that it was on forums back then. Yeah. So what I did is like I'd look for really natural places to bring up the podcast, right? Like somebody would be talking about a set and I'd be like, oh yeah, I actually talked about this on my podcast. I couldn't leave a link or anything, but I'd say it. And then people would be like, oh, that I'm interested. And then they'd come and they'd find it. And some of those early podcasts, I'd get like 30 people or 50 people to listen to it. And I felt amazing about that. Now that's, now you blow that out of the water, and now there's YouTube shows and there's all these other things, but I loved it. I loved making the content. It was so much fun. I found it really engaging to be talking to other collectors. I had people who would teach me things and I was learning things. And so, your question about like, where does the fire, the passion comes from? Like, I think if you really like cards and you really like talking about cards, then the idea of creating content is really just supernatural, right? And I think that's probably the same for you. Like you love the cards, and so you love to make the content. But that's a little bit of my history about like kind of where that came from. And then, you fast forward to like how the years have gone by. At different times I've been really busy, either with my career. I'm a dad. I've got 4 kids. Sometimes life has just gotten too busy for me to be able to do everything that I've wanted to. And so I've taken breaks here and there on the podcast. But then, 3 years ago, when the market was just booming and out of control and everybody was creating a podcast, there was just podcasts popping up all over the place, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And that's when we started Basketball Card Fanatic magazine, which, podcasts are a lot of work. Magazines are a lot of work. It's a ton, but we've had so much fun with it. And I think it's made a big difference to some of the people who are subscribers. And so, we've continued to do it, but it's the same thing that you're feeling. It's the passion for information sharing and like just the passion of the hobby.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's been the thing I've enjoyed the most, is talking to others who have a real just sort of encyclopedia knowledge of the things they collect or the sport that they're most interested in, and learning so much from every person that I've talked to over these past almost 40 interviews or whatever I've done now. It's been great, and it's just been a wealth of knowledge on all sorts of things regarding the hobby. And I just think that I think it's great that we have so many tools at our disposal now when it comes to knowledge sharing about the hobby and about just collectibles in general. So yeah, I mean, and it's been great seeing you go and talk the hobby on all these different platforms and different channels over these past few years. I mean, how did that kind of get started for you in terms of people reaching out to you because you were started to be kind of known as sort of this expert in the hobby, in particular in basketball cards?
Man, I don't know. That's a good question. I think I commented a lot on I had so many thousands and thousands of posts on Blowout. I've done thousands and thousands of transactions. I've done transactions with basically everybody in the hobby. And you just get to know people. And so I like when I say I've spent, the like Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour thing that people always talk about, like I passed 10,000 hours in the hobby decades ago, right? I have spent so much of my life thinking about basketball cards, and I don't know if that's a good thing. By the way, I'm a highly obsessive person. I maybe could have applied it to so many other good things in this world, but I chose basketball cards because I've always loved basketball and I've always loved cards. And, just that sheer quantity of time, of transactions, of talking about it. Worked at a card shop for a better part of a decade. Like it's just, and I still, I bought a big card this weekend. Like I just have loved it, and that has led me to these really cool moments. I've helped people move huge collections. I've gotten to know a lot of the people in the hobby that I want to know, and I've been really blessed in that. I've also been able to, acquire some really cool cards along the way that people have really wanted, and that helps you build relationships with people. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think that's some of it at least.
Yeah, I mean, you've had your hand into almost sort of every single sector of the hobby for the past couple of decades, So yeah, I just want to make sure we kind of had a good overall understanding of your impact in the hobby, because my next questions are going to be more fun questions, and so having that background though will probably help explain to people how it is you came about to collecting what you collect now. So let's kind of get into that. What are some of the things that you are focused on collecting lately, and some of the things? And I mean, I could just go ahead and ask about the fact that you've been sharing your top 100 cards on your Instagram page, which has been a lot of fun
Thank
to
you.
keep track of. And I mean, even your 100 through 90 cards were really awesome cards to see, and that's probably been from years of being in this industry and having that imprint in this hobby, that you have 100 just truly amazing cards that you can share with everyone. So what are some of those highlights in that 100 list that you've shared so far, that kind of at the top of your head, that really stand out to you? And how is it that you kind of came about to collecting some of the things you love collecting right now?
Well, you're really kind, and your words are probably too kind. I don't have that many cards, right?
Uh-huh.
I realized along the way that I kind of have a problem with hoarding, and I don't see that as a positive thing. And so I set some rules and boundaries for myself. I
Hmm.
think that ended up being one of the better decisions that I made. And because what it's allowed me to do is like focus on key transactions and key, um, acquisitions in my collection. Like there's
Hmm.
certain gaps that I want to try to fill, and certain things that I'm working on at all times. And you don't need a lot of projects to have a lot of fun. I think people make the mistake that they just want to go out and they want to acquire a lot of cool stuff,
Hmm.
and you run out of money real quick. I've never had a lot of money to start with, so that's always been a big problem, right? But then also you sort of run out of space real quick, and so I would describe myself. I mean, I steal this line from Spinatron. He describes himself as a rare card collector. I think I would describe myself that same way. Like, I don't find appeal in cards that are constantly available.
Hmm.
Um, I used to feel that way. I used to sort of be like, I need to get this PSA 8 Karl Malone rookie to put in the rest of my set. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think I'm like a higher level of collector. I don't put myself on a pedestal at all. I really don't. I think that when I see my son acquire a card that he's really wanted, and it's always there in the card shop every time he wants to go get it, I think that's a great thing.
Hmm.
But I find a great deal of satisfaction in finding something that I can tell a story about,
Hmm.
and not just like a pretty good story, but like this is the best, or this is the rarest, or this is the most important, or this is why this is significant. If I can't tell a story about the item that I'm buying, then I probably shouldn't buy that card. That's what I found over time. Like, I'll get it and I'll be like, oh, this is cool. But if all of these other guys have it, or even like a pretty good number of people have it, I kind of I kind of don't like it as much. And so I want something that's rare, something that's important, but also something that appeals to me. Like, if there's a player that I really don't like, I generally try not to. I don't go after their cards, unless that card is really important to the hobby, or to to collectors. You look at your collection. right? I saw your Oscar autographed rookie card. I love that card because, and it's a card that I also own too, right? So it's a common card between the two of us. I love that card because it's from the most important basketball set. It's from the, I think, this is arguable, obviously, but I think it's the best basketball set ever made. But they're not super rare cards because the set's really small, and you can find them. You can talk about how you want to find them in like a certain condition, and that's hard to do. That's true. But I want an Oscar that's like really different, right? That's like, oh, that's the card, and here's why it's different. And so I found, like you, an autographed copy of it, and to me that fills the spot in the collection of like the important card from '61, the important card of Oscar Robertson. It's incredibly rare. It's got a really cool signature, and it's got centering and like other condition issues that I think make my copy a pretty nice one. And so that to me is a more appealing card than like an Oscar PSA 6. Oscar PSA 6 is an amazing card. Not trying to take anything away from it, but there's more of those than there are of what I wanted. And so it's the rarity. I know I'm being long-winded. I'm sorry. I always am. But that all those things together create this rare thing that I want to have in my collection because I can tell the story about it.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's kind of why I sort of became more heavily invested into the signed vintage basketball in particular, just because you had the combination of all the things you talked about, like actual rarity and a lot of those things. Because, when I used to just collect graded cards, graded basketball cards, I used to kind of think, something that was like in the pop report of around 100 or 200 was pretty rare back in the day. Now when it comes to like some of the sign stuff, that's like nothing still compared to some of the 61 Fleer sign cards, in terms of rarity. You're really getting into actual rare territory when you're trying to find some of those vintage basketball stuff, because they just didn't sign very many of them back in the day. And we can go on and on about that. We don't necessarily need to, but it's that combined with sort of the importance of that set in particular, and how every single player in that set had some sort of real significant impact, on the game of basketball, pretty much. And then just you almost feel like you're sort of a curator of basketball history, with all those things combined when you're collecting them. Yeah.
So real quick to interject, we did this project when I was with the PWCC called the Iconic 100, where we asked, I think it was 175. I should remember this, but some amount of collectors to rank what they believed were the most iconic cards ever. And I was really surprised that there were, I think it was 3 sets in the whole of card history. There were 3 sets that had 3 cards in the set. 2 of them were baseball. The 2 higher ones were baseball. It was 48 Leaf and 52 Tops. I was really surprised that T206 didn't make it. T206 had 2 and then it had 1 in the top 20. And 1933 Gowdy didn't make it because we put the 4 Ruths together. I'm going.
Technicality, yeah.
But the Oscar was in the set, or was in the list pretty high. And I saw that and I went, man, the whole community views it that way, huh? And by the way, so did Jerry West and Wilt Chamberlain, making it one of 3 sets that had 3 cards in it. And I saw that and I was like, gosh, I got to get that nice Oscar. That's sort of what got me thinking more about that. I previously had an Oscar auto and I had traded it. And I was like, gosh, I got to get that card back because it's important.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I obviously agree. But yeah. And I also really enjoy seeing like your 68 Topps test cards, and you giving real prominence to that set, and really talking about the history of some stuff like that. That I think has come more into light lately over the past couple of years with all the content out there. But still, for a long time, things like that just weren't too well known. But just a set that has a real fascinating history to it, and why it's a real stuff that's really truly rare and truly interesting to try and chase down if you're able to. And not everyone is able to, because they're very difficult to find, and they can be very pricey, even the common players from that set. So yeah, it's great to see stuff like that, just to kind of give an overall sort of arcing history to some of the best and rarest in terms of what you can find from the history of basketball cards.
The reason I appreciate you saying that. The reason that I think people don't talk about things like that is because people care. This is a content creator. You have to you have like certain ways to measure how well you're doing. Most people measure how well they're doing based on how many people watch their show, how many people like their show, how long they watch their show. Those are kind of the main metrics, right? People
Right.
don't want to hear about some set that they've never heard of, that they've never collected, that they've never seen a card from. They want to talk about cards that they can actually go attain. And so I think it's important to talk about some of those things, not because it makes you more interesting or because it will win you more followers, because I don't think it does either of those things, but because I think that the real history of the hobby, the only way that it lives on is if we talk about those different things. So maybe that sounds a little bit altruistic, but like I think when I talk about 68 Tops Test, I don't think anybody care. I don't think very many people care. So it was nice to hear you
I
say
agree.
that.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I actually, you're gonna think I'm crazy for this. I actually I gave away my Wilt Chamberlain from that set, which was one of my favorite cards, but I gave it to a friend who I felt like needed it more than I did. And
Wow.
so I didn't sell it. I actually gave it to him, but there's a long story there. I still have the Jerry Sloan. And the Jerry Sloan is literally one of my 5 favorite cards in my collection. I looked for that card for a decade. It never came up at auction. And then one day, back when PWCC was still on eBay, it hit the PWCC, hit the auction. And I'm not joking you. I think I outbid what it ended up selling for by $3,000. I wanted it that bad. And I got it. And it was like, I mean, it is a keystone of my collection. Jerry Sloan was our coach here in Utah for my whole childhood. And it's just a great image of him. It came before his rookie card by 2 whole years. It's beautiful. It's just a beautiful card. And so I could go on and on about it forever. But 68 Topps Test is not a significant value part of my collection at this point. But to me, it's like I would love to own another Wilt, and I'd love to own a Russell. Have you ever seen the Russell card from that set?
I mean, I've seen pictures of it, but haven't actually seen it. And it's
Beautiful.
pretty cool. Yeah, I know a couple other guys that are collecting 68 Tops Test, and the Russell to them is like the one that seems to elude them the most. It almost never pops up, for sale. So yeah, it's pretty.
MK Sports Cards saw one hit eBay back in 2020, I believe, and he snagged it. He snagged it in like half an hour of it being listed, and I think that's and then there was another one actually that hit auction somewhere along the way, but I think those are the only 2 single Russells that have sold like in the last 20 years.
Yeah. That's crazy. So once again, when we're talking about like actual rarity, like those are things that I'm also always most interested in. So
Ooh, can I tell you? We talked about it before the show, and I want to get to it. If we have time, can I tell you my 61 test or my 61 Fleer story that I wanted to tell you beforehand?
absolutely, yeah.
I might have shared this in a place that you've heard it before. So if so, then I apologize. But so there was a time where, on the population report, you can go into PSA's site and you can see how many of the cards are graded. And now there's a section where you can click like autos.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see how many PSA DNA copies there are. Well, that didn't used to exist, right? There wasn't like a PSA DNA population section.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is back in I don't know, maybe like 2017. There's a collector on the Blowout forums. He's still really well known today. SP Authentic 84. His name's Joe. He's one of everybody's favorite people in the hobby. He's just like the nicest guy. And he was selling some stuff, and I had commented on the Blowout forum somewhere about like how I wanted a really cool Wilt Chamberlain autograph. And so he messages me, and he's like, "Hey Adam, I got this card. I picked it up a few months ago. I wonder if you're interested." And it's a Wilt 61 autograph. Right? And you're smiling because that's it, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the card. as the card, right? How many autographed rookie cards would you rather have than that one, Kurt?
For me personally, none. That's the top of my list, definitely. The only other one that may come close would be like a Mike N, or maybe the Jordan Star card or something like that, And those, yeah. But Wilt still for me would definitely be number one. Yeah.
Those are the most expensive ones. You might want to throw Maravich in there too, right? Because he passed
Yeah.
away early. But that's it. Like that's the whole list of like the great cards that
Yeah.
are like the most impossible to find, that are the PSA DNA autographs. So we struck a deal for $3,200. And that sounds crazy.
Oh,
I had a rule at that point that I would never spend over $3,000 on a card. I made the rule with my wife. I was never, ever going to do that. Right. Which also at this point sounds insane. Right. And so I said, Joe's like, I'll do 3,200. And I was like, no, I've got this deal with my wife. Joe, I'll only do 3,000. So he's just like, Adam, if you want this card, this is the price. And I was like, fine. And so I bought this Wilt Chamberlain autographed rookie in a PSA holder, all legit,
wow.
$3,200. And I post it to Blowout as like a mail day. When I post it, somebody's like, oh, that's crazy. There's only 2 of those in the world. And I was like, how would you know that? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then they pointed out, and I didn't know this, and Joe didn't know this either, that there's a population report. And it was brand new, I think. I think at the time it was brand new. I could be mistaken about that. So I look and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's only 2 of these in the world. And of course, I'm losing my mind. The other one was also somebody who was on the Blowout forums at that point. And I'm thinking, this is the card. I'm never going to sell it. It's going to be worth a ton someday. And I'm going to own it forever. So that's when I get a call, or I get a text from a guy named Mike who does really like, I don't sell my stuff hardly ever, my best stuff, right? I never do. Most of my best cards I've owned for years and years. He like comes to me and he's like, Adam, I was given your information by Joe, who I know previously on this card. I want you to know I'm putting together this set of 61 Fleer autographs, like a PSA registry set. And obviously you've got the card. Like I need your card. And I was like, dude, I'm so grateful you'd asked. I don't want to sell the card. And this is a great lesson, by the way, in how you deal. I've been thinking about doing a podcast on this. This is a great lesson of how you deal with somebody who's a real collector, right? Somebody who doesn't want to ever sell their stuff. Somebody like me. He goes, Adam, the only way I'm ever going to be able to complete the set is with your help. Which, of course, like pulls on my heartstrings, right? Because I get what it's like to be Mike. I get it. I totally get it. He's like, I need this. I'm willing to do whatever I need to do to get it from you. That's another thing, right? You want to know you're selling for a good dollar amount. So you're like, oh, okay, so this guy really needs it. He's a really nice guy. I really like him. He's got all these things about him that make him sort of the sort of person that you want to help. And I'm like, I just really don't want to do this. He's like, look, this is the deal I'll do. And this is what he gave to me. I shouldn't say this because Joe, if he ever listens to it, it's gonna be mad, but it is what it is.
Well,
so
it's like 6 years ago at this point. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's years ago, right?
That's usually and all that stuff. Yeah, gone past. Yeah.
So here's the deal. Jerry West autographed rookie card. It's the one that I posted on. I've had it for years now, but it's the one that I still own today. Oscar Robertson autographed rookie. I've traded that since. An Elgin Baylor PSA 4 autographed rookie that I've also sold since. A Wilt Chamberlain PSA 4 non-autographed, and $7,000.
Wow.
So at the time, it was like, I'm getting $15,000 worth of stuff, or $12,000 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I just paid $3,200 for this. And I was like, combined with the fact that this guy needs this card so badly, how can I say no to this? I've got to do it. And so I did it. And I'm still not even sure I regret it, because I think Mike needed the card. He did. He needed the card, and he was putting together a set. And it was his passion project, and I'm grateful I was able to help him. And clearly, it was not the worst thing for me overall. But as I look at my collection now, and I ask, what card would I like to have in my collection that's not there? You can guess what's really close to the top of the list. And it just still hurts today, because I'm glad that he has it, but there's this other big part of me that's like, man, I should have never, ever sold that card.
Yeah, well, that's incredible. I'm really glad you told that story. I know Mike. I know the Mike you're talking about, and he had the #1 set registry of 61 Fleer sign for a long time. until very recently. He finally fell down to number two because he had every single one of them except for one, I think, for the longest time, which is like the Carl Braun.
Mm,
Um, and there's a story about that that maybe I won't tell right now because I promised not to tell in
okay.
public. Maybe I'll tell you in private though.
Okay.
But no, that's an incredible story for that about that card, and it's just the fact that you had that card for a little while is just great, you know. And I think all of us who are doing this for a while will come across those cards that we'll have in our possession for at least a little while that are just even just to have those in our possessions for the time that we have them, it's just great. It'll even if you do wind up selling them off or giving them or even or whatever to somebody who truly needs them, just having them for that time period is just something that you'll never forget, and you can always have that story at the very least. So I won't kick you down too much on selling and trading the wilts, even though it's something that I couldn't even I couldn't even fathom having one in my possession right now. Of course, I got started doing the 61 Fleer sign set just a couple years ago, and unfortunately, since the time that you had that wilt, it's crazy how popular and how expensive they've gotten over the past 5 or 6 years. And the wilt alone is just something that I'm like, I hope I can get a wilt one of these days, but it's probably going to be extremely difficult to find a good one in a reasonable price points anytime in the near future.
I finally, after years, I mean, literally decades, added a Century Legends Wilt Chamberlain autograph with a
Hmm.
beautiful blue autograph on it. It's just perfect. It's mini sized. It's not quite large enough for PSA to grade it, and so they wouldn't grade the card. They only graded the autograph. They had graded the autograph at 10, but that card is classically too small, and so they don't grade most of them these days. I might, if I sent to Beckett, I might get them to put a numeric grade on it, but having a Wilt Chamberlain autograph in your collection as a vintage basketball collector, that's the guy. I think it's like, again, it's Mikan, it's Maravich. Those are the big ones that are like difficult to find.
Hmm.
I have a Maravich autograph on a 71 and a PSA 6 that is one of my favorite cards. I actually got that from Joe as well.
Hmm.
And I have like this collection of rare not modern, but like 90s cards and
Yeah.
into the early 2010s, and I love all of it. I don't know which of the stuff is my favorite, but I've always said that vintage basketball is my first love because I collected it back in the late 80s and early 90s. It's I put together an 86 Fleer set that started in 1992 and ended in like 1996 or 1997. It took me that long to put it together. I still have it. I've had it for all these years. It's got a BGS 1.5 Michael Jordan. I've owned, I don't know, 30 Michael Jordan rookies over the years, but I still keep the 1.5 because it sentimentally has the most meaning to me. Vintage basketball is the best, man. I love it.
Absolutely, I agree. So on any of the other cards that you've posted so far in your top 100 list that have a story that just stands out to you, or just a card that's just really meaningful to you, and you do have some modern stuff, what I would just kind of call like 90s up to 2010 is that's just sort of the in between era between vintage and ultra modern, of course. You have a lot in that sort of time frame, and is there anything that really kind of also stands out to you from a story perspective, or just something that's you're most proud of owning?
Well, I mean, I would say that every card that I post, remember how I said a few minutes ago that every card that I post, like I feel like has a
Yeah.
real story. I'll look at the most recent card that I posted. I had to actually like
Hmm.
toggle away from you here for a second so that I could look at it. The most recent card that I posted was last night. It was another old basketball card, older basketball players, but more modern card. It's the 2007 UD Black Octo autograph
Yeah.
from the Boston Celtics. That card probably is worth, my estimate on value on it's like between $4,500 and $6,000, and that's a lot of money for a basketball card, right? It's a ton of money for a basketball card. Those 8 players represent 55 championship rings. Sam Jones with 10, Bill Russell with 11. The first 5 guys on the card are all gone. Celtics, the early Celtics, are incredibly, vitally, crucially important to the history of basketball. And the card is worth a small fraction of what a modern RPA of an up-and-coming player is worth. And it just makes no sense to me that that's the case. But all 8 of those guys held that card. It's not a sticker autograph. It's on card. Frank Ramsey smudged the ink with his finger. The other 7 are pretty nice. 5 of them have passed away. But like, again, to me, that card I could talk about. I'm not joking about this. I could talk about that card for the next hour. I could share thousands of words on it. It has this unbelievable story to it, that it was held by all of them, that it came out of the pack, that those guys are all connected through the Celtics, that most of them played on the same team, that it's the most winning franchise of all time for that decade. We could talk about it forever, but I think every card that you own in the end should have a story. And if it doesn't, then you probably don't need it.
Yeah. And so you look at modern stuff, but it has to be stuff that's really unique. And there's also just something about the time frame. Like I talk about this a lot on my channel, of like, I just love that time frame of like 2003 2010. There was a lot of great, interesting stuff coming out in that time frame when you saw Upper Deck and Topps basically kind of competing, and they're doing some amazing stuff with high-end products that have never been done before, and they're really pushing the boundaries. And they're doing stuff like Upper Deck with their Upper Deck Black release, and they would have a lot of those multi-sign cards on card auto cards, and getting like an eight signatures on one card, and they had booklets of like 16 signatures on one card sometimes, doing some really amazing stuff that Panini's just not really doing anymore with their high-end sets. It was just a great time frame to find some really unique historical pieces that were pack pulled from those high-end products of Upper Deck and Topps that it's kind of missing nowadays, it seems like.
Your point here is really an important one to emphasize. I feel like everyone talks about how in the late 90s Fleer took all these chances, and they did, and they deserve all of the credit, right? My best cards most of them are from the 90s, right? And I recently interviewed Jean from Arena Design for Basketball Card Fanatic magazine. I listen to what she says with like a certain reverence, right? Because she changed so many things. This era, though, that you just highlighted, that exquisite era, we can call it, like Upper Deck took some real chances to have the audacity to ask 8 elderly gentlemen to all sign the same card and believe that it had the chance to turn into something. Like,
I believe they can do it within like the 3 or 4 months they needed to put it in the product,
to have that gall to like go for it and to try that thing, that from a, put your like hat on, like your organizational sort of like, we need to like manage costs and make sure that everything fits the right way. You can understand why Panini doesn't do that today. Like, it takes a ton to get there, a ton of effort, a ton of work, and there's real risk. Like, what happens if somebody passes away in the middle of it? Like, it's not a 0%. Like, that sort of thing happens. Where you get 6 autographs and then you can't finish the card. What happens if somebody won't sign it? What happens? There's all of these things, and Upper Deck dealt with those risks through the years. They certainly made some mistakes. They messed up on some stickers and put them on the wrong cards. They made all sorts of mistakes, but like, I think in our hobby, we should really applaud when people take risks and they take chances and they try something that's really different. And I think that applies to content creators too. Like when somebody says, I'm going to try this thing that's really different, and I think it has the chance to make us better. I follow those people and try to say, okay, how can we assist those people? Because there's not enough of that. There's a lot of follow the leader, right? There's a lot of do the easy thing to try to make the buck. There's not a lot of do the different thing that sort of that innovates in our space, and more than innovates, like creates a piece of art like in the card that like is really meaningful in the end.
Absolutely. And I just think that it's the unique stuff that will stand the test of time overall. I mean, I get why people want to get the sort of the GOAT rookies. I get why you want a Michael Jordan Fleer 86 rookie, even though they're tens of hundreds of thousands of them probably at this point. And I get why you want a LeBron James tops or tops chrome rookie, things of that nature. That's I understand that, but I just think that 10, 20, 30 years from now, everyone's going to have those cards. And I think the ones that are going to really, the collections that are really going to stand out are going to be those unique collections and those things that people maybe didn't even realize those were even obtainable at some point, or some of those unique sets or unique autograph cards even existed. I thought a lot about that when the Uncle Jimmy collection kind of came up and the news of that popped up, and everyone just went gaga over all of his cards. And the reason is because all those cards were cards that no one even really knew existed. Like no one really fathomed that there were signed baseball cards from the 1930s and 40s. It wasn't like a thing that many people knew about outside of a few, like a small niche community of hobbyists. And now a lot of people know about it. And now everyone loves that collection, and it even has its own PSA, a label and things like that. Like that to me is what I am shooting for with my collection. If I can get stuff that's kind of not in the same category, because no one will ever have another Uncle Jimmy collection like that. It'll be truly unique. It'll truly be one of a kind. So that's what I'm kind of shooting for, is trying to get a somewhat of a one of a kind type of collection in the end.
Well, I think that I just love that perspective, Kurt. I think of my friend Kevin, who's the designer for BCF. He wrote a piece on curation and how we're all sort of like part of the artwork is the curating of the artwork. And I think that people probably don't think about this very much, but if everybody would do what you just described that you're doing, you're building, what you're building has like it doesn't have to all be the same, right? I sure hope not, because my stuff's very different from beginning to end, right? Like I collect the history of basketball cards from the very beginning till now, and the stuff that's important in the middle, the stuff that I think really has significance, and all those other things that I talked about. That curation process and what comes out of it and how it sort of works and what story you're trying to tell in the whole process, I think that's really important. And if you set out on your collecting journey to create that, or maybe not even set out, but if you get there, where you then have the goals, the end, the sort of like here's what I want to accomplish in mind, I think that's what leads you to the best place. But my guess is most people don't do that. Most people, it's about the money. Most people, it's about the can I flip? Can I do this? Can I create the cash? That to me is a lower level of collecting. The higher level is this is what I want to own in the end, and this is what I want it to look like.
Yep. Yeah, and I think I've changed my perspective on how I collect over the past 3 years, and it's really rewarding to go down the rabbit hole of finding truly rare, unique, vintage signed pieces, because you learn so much about the history of those cards and even of those individuals and things like that, and why, once again, these things are really truly rare, why they almost never pop up for public auctions and things of that nature. And it's not like an easy thing of like, oh, I can just go on 130point.com, or I can just go on Card Ladder and figure out the history of the sales for a lot of these cards that we're talking about. You most likely will not be able to find those on the traditional apps or whatever. You have to really kind of do your own research and talk to other people that kind of know the history of those cards and things like that. It's just much more interesting for me lately, at least in my collecting.
I've got to tell you another story, because I think you just reminded me of it. So this weekend I bought the biggest card I bought in a long time. I bought a Kevin Garnett Superfractor from 2007 Chrome.
Nice.
Speaking of your era that you're talking about, I'm totally with you, not just on the exquisite stuff, but especially Chrome. Like the way that I've really thought about it over the last couple of years is like, there's obviously the gold refractors most years, but from 04 to 09, you've got those supers. And for players that you really like or that you collect, that's one of the best cards that you can find of them. Garnett and the Celtics won a championship in 2007. And so that card is really cool because it's his first Celtic card. It's from the year he won the championship. It's the Superfractor. It's beautiful. It's graded a 9 by PSA. I love it. It could be rated a 4 by PSA too, and I would love it just as much. But somebody messaged me after I posted it, and they said, "Man, this card sold 2 years ago for $450. I spent $10,000 on this card." And he's like, "This card sold for $450 2 months ago." And then he followed up and he said, because I said to him, I was like, "Wow, well, that makes me feel," what word did I use? That makes me feel jealous, or that makes me feel something. I can't remember what I said. Frustrated. I don't know. But I was like, but I don't really care. It doesn't really matter to me, what it sold for. But then he came back and he said, yeah, it was one of those funny ones where the person listed it on eBay at a low buy it now. Somebody hit the buy it now immediately. And I would have paid, he said, at the time, I would have paid $4,500 for it. But the seller honored the guy who bought it for $450. And so it sells. So we learned a few things there, right? We learned that those people who were just looking at the graph, they didn't get the context here, right? They didn't get that it was actually worth way more than the $450 when it originally sold. It was a mislist eBay that sold for that, really, but because the seller didn't know what they were doing. And so some people would look at that and they'd go, Adam, you spent 20 times what this originally sold for 2 years ago. You made a huge mistake. Other people might look at it and say, gosh, that's a really good price for one of the key Garnett cards that exists from the era. It's not about looking at graphs at that point. It really isn't. It's about how important is that thing to my collection. And where I have the 2012 gold Garnett, that's number 5 of 10, which is probably his best card in the Panini era. Mm-hmm. I've got a quad auto with him, LeBron, Kobe, and MJ from 08. And I've got a PMG championship of Garnett from Fleer, which are like 3 of the best cards you can get from each of those different brands. To add the tops, one of the best tops cards of Garnett, like I felt amazing. I was thrilled to have that card, and I was thrilled that it went for what it went for. I thought it might go for a lot more, but that's just I'm sorry to be long-winded again, but that's the what you're talking about. It's not just about the graph. There's more there that I think you need to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also, I think there's a reason too why a lot of those truly rare stuff almost never go for public auction, is because people like to keep that information very protective, especially when it comes to those high-end, hard to obtain cards. And not very often do you find an example of what you found with that Garnett Superfractor that even had a data point, and it was a misleading data point at that, of course. And so yeah, you're not going to find data points or truthful data points, or most of the time on a lot of these cards. So it's kind of up to you to make a decision of what you want to spend on that thing to obtain it. By the way, where did your love from Kevin Garnett come from? Was that just, were you just always been a Garnett guy, or you just been always just been a big Boston guy and just loved him when he came to Boston?
I was not a Boston guy. In fact, I don't even love Garnett as a Celtic. I love Garnett as a Timberwolf. I love that you asked me this. In 1995, when Signature Rookies came out, there were a few different Signature Rookies Garnett autographs. One of them was an insert called Hoopla. It's actually a beautiful card. It stands up really great today. It's got it's kind of like this etching. It's hard to describe. It looks like a 90s insert though. And it's a great looking card. He's in his Farragut Academy jersey. And it showed up at my card shop. We had a bid board where you could go place bids. And I had some birthday money, and I was 12 years old and won a Garnett because it was like a really cool card. I paid like $27 or $30 for it, or $35 for it. And now I owned a Kevin Garnett autograph, and then I really followed him. I acquired his finest rookie for a Shaquille O'Neal metal insert that was only worth a couple of bucks. That was a great deal for my friend Chad. He actually runs a podcast now, here in cards, and I got that card from him. So I started collecting all this Garnett stuff, and he collected all this Kobe stuff the subsequent year. And so Garnett became like, I would stay up late Sports Center to hopefully see a Garnett highlight, He was easily my favorite non-Jazz player of my whole childhood. No question. He was my favorite. And it just so happens that all these years later, I've had a few chances here and there to pick up like key Garnett cards.
Very cool.
You're a Garnett guy too, right? I saw you post a signature rookies card, I think, not too long ago.
I'm not really a Garnett guy necessarily. I tend to look for stuff of like guys that I consider the top 50 guys of all time. Obviously Garnett is probably top 25 on my list still, I would say. So yeah, I'm just
between like 22 and 26, somewhere in there.
Yeah, definitely. And so when an interesting Garnett stuff like that comes up, and I saw the guy had a lot of those actual like first year autos, the unlicensed autos, but autos of Garnett that are so unique because he changed his signature quite a few times between the time he came into the league and the way he signs now. So these autos just look so cool and unique, and you're not going to find them ever again because he won't sign that same way, obviously. So I'm always interested when things like that pop up.
Okay, I got to show you something while we're on the topic. This is a binder that I have that I just put cards in that I don't intend to ever sell.
Yeah.
And I think you're gonna like. I think you'll like this. You might think it's stupid, but I think you'll like it. So, in the back of the binder, there's this card right here.
Mm-hmm.
You seen this card before?
I have. I don't see them. The signed ones come up very often, but yeah.
So the interesting thing is, so that's the front, and this is the back.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't on any checklist, and back before Ken Golden's Golden auctions really started taking off, I asked Ken about the card, and he said Garnett never signed for us. This is a classic card, right? It's really interesting because I've owned thousands of classic cards. This came in a huge lot of cards that were received like either post bankruptcy or some sort of distributor because it had thousands of classic autographs of mostly common guys, and then there were just a few Garnetts in there. I've been able to find sub 10 of these in existence. They exist. They're real. It's not a faked card, but nobody has any idea where it came from. They won't grade it. PSA won't grade it. Beckett won't grade it, but it looks identical to how it should look if it was produced by the set. My theory is that Classic sent Garnett cards to sign. He never returned them, but signed some of them, and then they got out into the wild because the autograph looks exactly like it's supposed to. It wasn't marketed to me in some way to get me to make a lot, right? It was included in a giant lot. Anyway, I love stuff like that. Speaking of rare, unique stories, like this card's got a crazy story.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that happen with some of those early to mid 90s sort of unlicensed stuff. A lot of backdoor signing things happening during that time period, and some of the sort of the first interesting, unique autograph stuff that you won't find, and you didn't find up to that point because they didn't start doing them obviously until around that time period. And but in a lot of those companies that kind of went bankrupt real fast, and then they just sort of did all kinds of stuff with their inventory after the fact. So some interesting things from that time period for sure.
Why do you think the hobby frowns on that like non-licensed stuff? And how do you feel about
it? Unfortunately, I think a lot of that has to do with some of the major players of the hobby, like Dr. Beckett. I think was kind of a very strong voice about things like that, and how he sort of categorized things, like categorize rookie cards as being like extended rookie cards if they weren't licensed, or if they weren't pack pulled and things of that nature. And so I think unlicensed or uniquely distributed stuff kind of got a bad rep because it's just sort of been ingrained into us for quite a long time that those aren't like the legit things. They're not a Topps brand, they're not Upper Deck or now a Panini or whatever. Then it sort of makes them not legit in a lot of ways. And I don't know. And, some of those unlicensed stuff, they try to really get away with a lot of things. They literally try to get away with putting out as many autographs as possible. And so a lot of those cards, there were like 3,000 of them produced or whatever, or,
Sure.
They try to do some really funny marketing stuff and said this is a limited edition, but there were actually like 10,000 of them or something crazy. And So people kind of look back on that and think that's pretty ridiculous and pretty funny looking back on it. But still, like we talked about, there were some really unique pieces that came out of a lot of those unlicensed product back in the day, um, that unfortunately don't really exist anymore outside of Leaf, because it's hard to establish an unlicensed product like that nowadays, and most people don't even try and attempt it. But we had quite a few that attempted it back in the early mid '90s, and some really interesting stuff came out from that time period for sure.
Would you rather have? So I'll put you on the spot. Would you rather have a '96 press pass Kobe Bryant autograph, which I don't own and I've never owned? You know the card though.
Yep. The lower Marion, he's like someone's tugging his jersey or whatever. Yeah.
Good, yeah.
Yeah.
That would you rather have that or like a 2005 Upper Deck like SP Authentic Kobe Bryant not or autograph on card in the Lakers uniform? Clearly going to be a better card, by the way. And that's 2005 SP Authentic is going to be a good looking card.
Yep.
Well, and they're both just plain autographs. Which one would you rather have?
I would go for the '96 press pass. Once again, I'm always really much more fascinated by sort of how the cycle of players' autographs, and when they start signing stuff at an early age, and they typically change the way they sign stuff over time, especially after they start signing, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of these things. I'm always very interested in the very early versions of their autographs, and how there's typically not very many of them that exist out there, and that Kobe is a definite example of that.
I couldn't agree with you more. I've never had the card, which is funny because I collect Kobe like crazy, but maybe it's because you see it come up fairly often, and maybe it's because the autograph just doesn't look good with the background the way that it is. I don't know, but
Yeah,
like, he signed that when he was 18 years old.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's
They
so
definitely
cool.
they definitely had a lot of issues, like all those Kevin Garnett ones that were just done with like a dull black pen or something like that. Unfortunately, they didn't have the foresight of having a brighter pen for them to sign with, or just a more interesting looking background for them to sign on top of, or things like that. So that kind of knocks down people's interest in a lot of those cards as well, unfortunately. But at the same time, yeah, they're very unique. You're not going to see Garnett's autograph look like that ever again, the way he signed back in 1995. You're not going to see, obviously, Kobe's the way he signed back in 1996 when he first came to the league. And so I find those still a little bit more interesting, in my personal opinion.
I love your brain here. I think you and I are very similar on this. The other set that comes to my mind, you might know it. Most people don't know it. I think it was made by Signature Rookies. I think it was called Gold Standard. It had a whole bunch of Hall of Famers. It was a multi-sport set, and I think the autographs were numbered out of like 7,500 or some big number. It's got Kuzi. It's one of the only DeBuscher autographs.
Yeah.
It has Mikan. I think it has Mike. Does it have Mikan? I should know that.
I don't remember the Mike in that set. I definitely remember the Kuzi and the DeBuscher that you
Maybe it
talked
doesn't
about.
have Mikan. Maybe I'm wrong. But it has a whole bunch of football greats and a lot of guys that have passed away 20 years ago or something. Like, these cards cost nothing. You can go get like an Elvin Hayes out of that set for like $6 on eBay. And I see that, and the collector in me rejoices, because it's like, my son can go buy that card and he can go, oh, Elvin Hayes, he's a top 15 scorer of all time. And oh, where'd he go to college? And what was he known for in the NBA? And how did, like, there's so many things to that, but because people don't know the set, because it was unlicensed, it sells for nothing. But the autograph's just as true. And the card, honestly, is pretty good looking. I think we shouldn't just promote those things that sell for a lot of money. We should promote those things that are like really cool and sort of further the future of the hobby. Anyway, thanks for letting me share that.
Absolutely. I always think about the action pack signed cards. What was that? Probably like 1993 or something like that. And like, you can legit get, you can get like some of the all-time NBA greats, or even just basketball greats. Like, you can get like a John Wooden or Red Holzman from that set for not that much money still. They still don't sell for very much, but it's like, man, you talk about some of the all-time best basketball players ever signing on cards back during a time period where you didn't find their signatures on almost anything. and they're really interesting. But yeah, they still don't go for very much money. But whatever.
Did you see the Pawn Stars with the Bill Russells?
Yeah, I did see that episode. Yeah.
That's amazing. That the thing that always made me nervous about that set was that, like, sets that came after it had like the COA language on the back of the card, or had something that really distinguished the card from the other version, like the autograph from the non-autograph version. Sometimes
Right.
they didn't have a non-autograph version, and that was enough to sort of distinguish it. But like, I don't think there's enough education. Honestly, I'd find it really interesting to read something on those action-packed cards to know like how you can know something's real. Maybe it's just me lacking understanding. Maybe it's always easy to tell. That's an interesting idea for a piece. Actually, is that action pack set?
Yeah, I agree. Something for you to tackle in the future. Now, I love getting ideas. But yeah, I really enjoy seeing your top 100 that you put on your Instagram page. By the way, if you haven't followed Adam yet, it's at the Real 27 guy. Is that correct? Am I remembering that right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
follow him on Instagram if you want to see the rest of his list. I don't remember what number you're on currently, but I think you still have at least 50 cards or so to go. Is that right? So I can't
Yeah,
wait to see.
I think 54 to go.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the remaining 54, especially get to your top 10. I'm really looking forward to that. And then yeah, what else are you up to right now that you want to make sure to mention? And obviously, you talked about your magazine, but other things that you're involved with still that yeah you want to make sure everyone knows about.
Well, I just want to say I've loved this conversation, and I've already said it a couple times, but I love your brain as a basketball card collector. I'm grateful that we got to connect, and I love that you're the sort of things that you're talking about. I love your collection, and just appreciate being able to share some thoughts on the platform. Hopefully, we've talked about something that's been interesting to people today, but I know it's been really fun for me at least. Um, you're right about the magazine. You can go to bcfmag.com if you're interested. If anybody's interested in subscribing, we do actually in 2023 create a print magazine every month. Um, I have an issue somewhere. They're all behind me. I was going to pick one up and show it to you, but there's that. There's I started doing the basketball card podcast again weekly. I've done 4 episodes in the last 4 weeks, and I'm planning on doing it weekly going forward. And so, if you want to check that out, it's on all the major places. And then the other thing is on my social, I'm always sharing things that are selling out in the hobby and their stories. And so maybe PWCC or another entity will have an item that's up that I feel like needs more storytelling associated with it in a way that like helps people understand like why it's really cool. This week, in fact, just before you and I jumped on here, I dropped a post about a Lamar Odom Kobe Bryant dual logo man autograph from 2004 Exquisite and why that card's cool. Some of Lamar and Kobe's history and some of the history about dual logo men and dual logo men autographs. Because I think a lot of times people will see the card and they'll go, oh, that's really cool. That's really good looking or whatever. But like knowing the history, knowing why it's significant, I think we don't do enough of that storytelling. And so I try to do that. I don't know if I do a good job, but I've been around it long enough that hopefully I can do something that's positive. But there's always stuff. I'm the easiest person to find. If anybody has any questions for me, hit me at my Instagram. And if anybody has any questions on the magazine or the podcast or any of the things that I'm doing, I'd always love to chat.
Well, great. Well, I too have really enjoyed this conversation. Really glad that we got a chance to talk today. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much one last time. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this today.
Thank you, Kurt.